Welcome to another edition of Fast Forward Radio. This is Clay Richardson, your host, and I'm very honored to have as our guest today Reshma Block from Compass Consulting, a leading project management and business continuity planning firm. And so Reshma, one, I'm very happy to have you, given everything that's going on. And I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background before we jump in.
Sure. Thank you, Clay, for having me. It is kind of an interesting time to talk about business continuity. How I got involved in this area, it was actually pre 9/11. I was kind of a newbie IT kid hired right out of college with Intel Corporation back in Silicon Valley. And I was really the only disaster recovery manager for that entire, I think at the time it was a $60-70 billion firm. And then 9/11 hit. And I had one employee at the time. But as we were watching the experience of the towers replaying over and over and over again, I was sitting in my pajamas on the West Coast. And I had this kind of almost Jerry McGuire kind of moment where I just got out my laptop and just started typing and typing and typing and typing. So how my background got started in business continuity, even though it kind of predates 9/11, it really didn't focus really on the continuity of operations. It was mostly disaster recovery and data backup at that time until 9/11, in which I wrote this 10-page paper outlining every single one of our vulnerabilities as a company, basically concluding that if 9/11 happened to Intel, they would never recover. We'd be out of business.
Wow.
We'd be shutting our doors down because we had so many glaring gaps and holes. And, I'm one person with one engineer working for me, managing disaster recovery for the entire company.
Wow.
So that was kind of my foray. They eventually gave me a call. The office and CIO gave me a call a couple of days later and told me that, what's it going to take to fix this? And, I'm in my mid-20s, fresh out of college. I'm like, I don't know. I just took a guess. I'm like, let's see. I said $50 million, 5 people in 3 years. Just kind of came out there. And he's like, okay, you got it. And, immediately I was put to task on solving all of those vulnerabilities. And we did it on time, on budget, creating software and hardware that never existed to be able to have a centralized technical capability to support all of the different systems that Intel had. I mean, remember, we made microprocessors. So you can imagine that every operating system, every piece of hardware, every software, every database is something we use to make sure our microprocessors would function efficiently, right? So there's data sitting on all of those different platforms. And so we basically had to partner with vendors to write software for us that would give us kind of this centralized solution that had never existed before. So that was kind of how I dove into business continuity.
Yeah, that's really an amazing story. And I know I had a chance to see you give a keynote, and hearing about your background, it just made me think, wow, 9/11 sparked this whole new era of how companies think about business continuity. And now with COVID and coronavirus and the current pandemic, it just seems like companies are going to have to rethink what business continuity even means. Like, what's your thoughts on that, of kind of going from one crisis, kind of fast forward, I guess, 20 years later almost? And how do you see business continuity changing between crises or staying the same?
This is a really good question. It's something I've been contemplating quite a bit for the last several months. Business continuity has evolved to now, it's become a very standardized process in the sense that now you do, risk assessments every year, and you understand how to, mitigate them as much as possible. You do business impact analysis to determine, what processes, if they were impacted, would be the most costly for the company, right, to recover from. You write recovery plans, you do testing, maintenance. It's kind of become this routine process where you get certified actually in these steps. And what I think this 100-year pandemic has taught us And granted, in doing a risk assessment, we all look at, what is the likelihood, the probability of a pandemic occurring in this, in that particular area or geography for the business. And I can guarantee you, actually, I'm going to stretch a little bit, and I would say I would be surprised to know that someone predicted in their business continuity plan a 100-year pandemic happening to the point where globally everything was shut down. So I'm rethinking business continuity in a couple ways. One, I don't believe that we really have, I think there was a failure of imagination, almost similar to like 9/11, in understanding truly all the risks that a business can, be subjected to. We have a 100-year pandemic, with a great kind of depressionary economic situation, with some even now combined to potential civil unrest, right, in major metropolitan cities, which are all independently assessed. Now I'm thinking, the failure of imagination is what's caused so many businesses to kind of almost be flat-footed. So that's one thing I'm looking at. The other thing is, from a continuity of operations, we always focus on how do we get our existing operations running again, right, in the event of a disruption. And I think what this pandemic has taught us, and many businesses have had to discover painfully, is those business models may no longer be relevant.
Right.
I mean, almost overnight, so many companies went from, manufacturing car parts and, beer to making plexiglass and masks and, PPE and things like that, right? Yep. Just to, one, support, our fellow community members and essential workers, but also to continue to generate some revenue in what's a very difficult economic situation. So I think from a continuity of operations, we also have to rethink that, we have to be able to reimagine operations being different in the event of a disaster or an emergency.
The new model. It's really interesting because I think for our audience, they're probably thinking, well, why is Clay talking to a disaster recovery, business continuity planning expert right now when we normally talk about design thinking, right? We usually have design thinking leaders on. And it's really interesting. I know the conversations we were having, it was almost like, design thinking and reimagining becomes a key part of business continuity, right? It seems like an odd set of things to put together, but in today's world, it seems like it makes even more sense, right? So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that intersection that you see between design thinking and what's possible and continuity of operations as another piece, and business continuity planning.
I think there is definitely an intersection now happening between the two that I never imagined, right? And I don't think most people traditionally look at business continuity, which is generally almost kind of a mundane, kind of almost stale way of documenting operations and recovery processes. And design thinking is so innovative. So you don't normally look at business continuity as innovative.
Right. Or sexy.
It's sexy. It's
not really that sexy.
You almost have to be kind of crazy to really want to do this line of business, right? But yeah, it's not typically seen as being an innovative type of activity that you pursue in an organization. And so the intersection to me that I see happening is the innovation required to really be, really stay in business, to really understand how to be agile and flexible, and to really modify your business model almost on demand, right? And that really is design thinking in a nutshell. And so how can, companies take their, the risks that they understand, the business impact analysis of what are all my mission critical processes and functions that could, be impacted and could render us, out of business. How do I apply design thinking principles to be able to ideate, to be able to prototype, get customer feedback as quickly as possible, and modify our operations such that we can continue revenue and we can continue employing people and we can continue paying bills in the event that our supply chains are drastically now gone globally, right? In the event that, our employees are no longer able to go to work anymore globally, right? I mean, sometimes you can understand geographies being impacted, but now on a global scale, you're going to have to be much more agile and flexible, understanding what the consumer demand is, and being, I think redefining resiliency it's really no longer about how do I start, my operations back up again. It's what is my operations going to look like moving forward.
It's fascinating because I see this from two different angles, right? It's interesting, really in order to focus on continuous operations, continuity of operations, you need to be innovative, right? You need to now become more innovative. But it's also interesting, the reverse, right? Where, companies think about innovation when they're almost on their deathbed a lot of times, right?
Yeah,
right?
It's really
like
too difficult.
You think about a Blockbuster or, Borders, those are the poster children, right? It's like they thought about innovation once they came up against a competitor that really was about to put them out of business. And then they realized, like,
technology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you think about Netflix, it's like Blockbuster had the same plan. One of the executives presented this idea for a streaming service before Netflix really got big. And the leadership team basically said, no, that's not something we're going to do because we make so much money off of the late fees from the discs.
From those VCR,
from
the discs, the tapes, and all that.
DVDs, exactly, right? And so it's really interesting because I was working on a blog post today that talked about don't wait until it's too late to innovate, right? Because that's really when we start talking about continuity of operations. It's almost like you can't think about that now just when a crisis occurs.
It's an excellent point. Yeah.
Right. Because even
you want to be your own disruptor, right? How can you control the disruption versus being victim to the disruption, and acting after the fact? Yeah, no, absolutely.
This is probably going to be a little bit of a curveball, but given everything that's going on, curveballs are normal nowadays. But it's really interesting to think, like, we're talking about design thinking and business continuity planning, but there's also systems thinking, right? Which is really about looking at the full system, right? So if we think about what's happening both at with the protests, let's say, but also with the pandemic, right? You also need to use systems thinking to look at the big picture and really be able to figure out, like, what are the things that need to change, and then using design thinking to do rapid experimentation. Right. And so it's, that whole piece, looking at your business is going to sound really weird, but looking at your business as an organism, right?
Yeah.
Your business is an organism.
As a whole ecosystem. Absolutely.
Right. A whole ecosystem. And so from that standpoint, it's not just about a life-threatening event happen. It's actually about how do you make sure the organism can continuously adapt to whether it's a life-threatening event or it's a competitor that might be starting to nip at your heels, right? And so being able to drive that innovation. So it did exactly what you walked through just made me think of business continuity planning as this bigger thing, and made it sound sexy too now, right? It's not just about getting hit by the train. It's actually like, no, this is it's almost like sustainability, right? How do we build a sustainable company?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the process of the business impact analysis, it's really right in line with, kind of expanding on it using systems thinking, right? Is how do we understand how things influence one another within the whole ecosystem? And we do that as part of, how we develop the BIA and understand, the potential impacts. But, when you marry it with design thinking, the thing that doesn't often come up, at least in my experience in the last 20 some odd years doing this, is, how do we make sure we also include the customer, right?
Right.
And ensure that we're actually applying some of these principles from design thinking, like empathy, and being able to put ourselves in the customer's shoes, because even though we may understand, let me give you an example, that cash collections is important in the event of getting revenue coming in, right? Late fees coming in, all that.
Yeah.
Really, in the event of a disaster or an emergency that we're having now, that may be something that's not something you want to focus on if you were to put yourself in the customer's shoes, right? Maybe what you want to do is actually offer different financing options. Maybe what you want to do is support them, economically in a way that you possibly can, given the current situation that our population is in. So yeah, I absolutely think that if you can look at your continuity of operations from a systems level, apply design thinking, especially the customer and the empathetic viewpoint, you're going to be much more successful in coming out of these emergencies when they occur, because it's oftentimes, again, a failure of imagination, failure of creativity, not understanding your customer, or companies that are disrupted. Many of them, the far majority of them, especially small businesses, don't come out of these types of situations.
It's really interesting because where we met is working with together with a healthcare company, large healthcare company. And it's really interesting. I'd asked you not too long ago, like, how did you start working with this company, and how did you go from, because what we were working on was more customer experience, right? It was really customer experience focus, helping with the customer experience strategy. And then I asked you, how did you start working with them? And it just came, again, a curveball, like, oh, how did that? So if you can tell the story, because I think that our audience would really be fascinated by this connection of where you came from for this particular client.
Yeah, so this client that we worked with hired me to develop a business continuity plan. They were a medium-sized company. They hadn't had a plan in place. They knew that they needed one. They're based in, Orange County, California, certainly earthquake country down here, right? And so they brought me on board to develop their BCP. And one of the things we did differently here with this company is, even though they're based in Orange County, almost in kind of a 3-mile radius or so, they had so many disparate campuses doing different things that we ended up developing, I think it was like 4 business continuity plans for them. Because each building, if you will, or each location ended up being so critical to their operations based on just how they were organized. And in that process, when you do a BCP, when you do a BIA, a business impact analysis, when you understand kind of, what do I need for recovery purposes, to get to all of that, you kind of have to, I call it, fillet open the company, right?
Yeah.
You have to go department by department by department, department head, manager by manager, and interview them all to really understand truly what's mission critical. Because if you ask them just right off the bat, they'll tell you everything that they do is mission critical.
Mission critical, yeah.
And in an emergency, you can't prioritize everything. You just can't, right? So we have to get to the bottom of, no, here's what's truly mission critical for you that you focus your limited resources on in an emergency. And as we fillet open the company, we don't want to just, we want to be valuable in the sense that, yes, we have to deliver this plan for you, but we will discover things that maybe you haven't seen. So we started to, and we'll document them and share them to our executive stakeholders. And we'll discover things like, we don't have enough job aids or documentation or backup personnel. You kind of have single points of failure, right, that could add to your vulnerabilities. We discover things like how you communicate to your customers is not streamlined. So when you have an emergency, you might have a more difficult time getting your message across because, let's say, you don't have emails for all your customers, and your phone systems are down, right? Or you don't have a way to, communicate through SMS because you never brought the technology in. You don't even have a way potentially to communicate to your own employees because that hasn't been, something that's been of focus. So through the process, we'll often discover CX improvement areas. We'll even discover employee experience improvement areas. And we'll recommend that they address those. And so in some of those discussions, that then led to, me coming in and helping them solve some of those CX vulnerabilities. Yeah, with updating their CRM, with really understanding kind of how we could leverage marketing automation tools, for instance, right, to communicate more effectively with customers. And so that's kind of how that transition happened.
Yeah, BCP to CX.
Yeah,
and that makes sense.
Think about it. Right now you want companies to really be sensitive to their employees and their customers, and that goes for every emergency. That goes for every disruption. The last thing you want to come across as a company that's got a reputable brand in your industry is to be flat-footed, right? And kind of make these mistakes in communications, make these mistakes in, understanding and relaying back to your key constituents effectively. And so even though it seems kind of odd to transition, from BCP to CX and whatnot, it's actually kind of goes hand in hand.
And I think it's critical. I think about, this blog post I wrote about the restaurants basically putting plexiglass between diners and saying, hey, everything's good. It's like, what type of customer experience is that? You know what I mean? I'm going to go and I got to worry about not just the person next to me, but the food that's being brought out. And so I think that's those two things I can see now going together. I think when we first talked about it, I was like, I don't know. I wasn't completely convinced at the time. Right. So what do you see in terms of, or what advice do you give to companies that are really trying to think through the next 6 months when it comes to continuity of operations, but even just thinking through, there's so much going on, the pace of, I can't even call it change, it's really the pace of disruption is something we've never experienced in our lifetime. So how do you recommend companies really tackle this at this time?
That's a really good question. I think we have to move the industry at large when you look at business continuity. We generally think of, annual updates and, annual reviews of them.
Yep.
We really have to bring all of this real time. We have to have, dashboards that continuously assess our risks and vulnerabilities. We have to have dashboards that continually assess our employee availability, right, based on whatever situation's happening. We have to have a way for executives to understand really real time what disruptions are happening to their business, so that they can then hopefully employ the culture that they've developed around CX and utilizing design thinking for innovation, ideally, right, to be able to turn on a dime, to be able to meet your customers where they need you the most, to be able to meet your employees where they need you the most. So I think we really have to shift from these kind of analog-based business continuity plans, right, to a much more real-time, digital, data-driven, continuity of planning happening on an everyday basis. It's ingrained as part of your operations, and not something you pull out when the disruption occurs. I think that's really where we're going to have to go.
If you look at, I think what that made me think about is Tyson's Foods and just the meat packing processing industry, right? Is literally their continuity of operations, their business continuity planning is almost hour to hour, if not day to
based
day,
on employee availability, illnesses, absolutely.
Right. And so it's being able to track that. And I know there are a lot of companies that have come out with the essentially COVID-19 trackers, right? So it's almost like tracking employees. And that seems very divorced from the bigger picture sometimes, right? It's you got a tracker to kind of track employees, but it doesn't necessarily look at, well, what functions are these employees working? And then what's the impact, right?
Right. This is where you marry the BCP process with it, right? So how are these folks impacting my mission critical functions? And at what point does it get so impactful that that mission critical function can no longer function? And that's where the two definitely have to be married. So I think business continuity, much like it evolved, and we started this conversation this way, evolved after 9/11. We didn't really have this kind of widespread term or widely known term called BCP, or business continuity planning, or disaster recovery and backup. We're looking at another evolution, definitely in this process to become more real time for sure, so that we can, like you said, marry the fact that there are things that are absolutely critical to an organization. But if you're tracking data just to track data, and it's not really integrated with how your business needs to operate and run on a day-to-day basis, then you just have more reports that you can look at, and it's not going to be helpful.
So I'm thinking we're coming up to the summer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a business. I'm trying to think through the next 6 months, doing some business continuity planning, trying to think about how do I become more resilient and get, design thinking, innovation,
Mm-hmm.
but also like, what scenarios should I be thinking about when I'm planning? Like, given everything that's going on, should I also be looking at like dinosaurs might come back, right? So how do I, like you don't know, who knows, right? But like, what are some scenarios you think organizations need to at least be thinking about this on the horizon over the next 2 or 3 months?
It's a really good question. It's something I'm actually working on now in terms of sharing with my clients, is a heat map. When we do a risk assessment, we create a heat map of all of the potential risks that your company is vulnerable to, and the probability of those risks. And generally, you have a spreading of red, yellow, and green. And as I'm working on this, I'm having more reds and yellows than I'm having of greens. And I think companies have to be very realistic here. We are in the middle of a 100-year pandemic. We won't see a vaccine, right, until at least the end of the year, if not early next year, especially for the masses. We're in the middle of some significant civil unrest, something that we haven't seen in a very long time, with Great Depression-like conditions. And now heading into the summer, our government agencies that track hurricanes and natural disasters are reporting that we should expect to see a worse than average hurricane season as well. We should expect to see a worse than average fire season out west as well. So now add in these confluence of disruptions, right? Both natural and potentially man-made. God forbid you have a cyber attack, right, in the middle of all of this, right? And so what businesses should be thinking about is my company or my employees, is the culture fully prepared to manage these confluence of disruptions, and should prioritize ensuring that their culture is really focused on that. Not being a Debbie Downer, not being, negative or anything.
I was going to say, give us some hope here. Where's the silver lining? I'm just going to go hide in my closet until
come out in 2021. We all sort of see 2020 go away and be like, I'm done. Wake me up in 2021. But what's going to get us through this, more, as much as planning will help, as much as reality will help, making sure you have the right culture. What ends up being kind of the most hopeful thing through any disaster that you study, in our generation, our lifetime, 9/11 was really significant. We've had so many emergencies in our country since then. But it's really trust in humanity, trust in each other, trusting your employees, trusting your customers, really kind of developing a almost humble, approach to the continuity. No one is too big to fail. They just aren't. We are now experiencing so many types of, incredible circumstances that we almost have to go back to more of a humility, from a company standpoint, where even if I am, Fortune 100, Fortune 10, for that matter, I could be out of business tomorrow, right? And so are we as a company instilling the trust and the support for our employees and the customers first and foremost, so that we're seen as a valued company in this kind of next economy, in this new world that's emerging. So, the hope to me is that I think human beings in general tend to be very collaborative. I think human beings in general, when push comes to shove, tend to want to help one another. I've seen that studying disaster after disaster, emergency after emergency, as you see all these amazing stories. So I think we're going to see a lot of that. But I think that to plan around the reality and then to ensure that you're putting some faith in human beings is going to be, kind of this essential combination, while you're also preparing to automate some things, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
you kind of have to strike that right balance. And I can, assure you that every company that's come out of an emergency, yes, they had to maybe move locations, change their business model, but really they were empathetic to their customers. Customers saw them as not just a box, an entity, but they saw them as relatable, right? They saw them as someone that cared about them. And, knowing that we all want to help each other through all of this, I think that large or small, we're all going to have to figure out how do we best rely on both our customers and our employees in the event of a disruption, and not presume that we know kind of how to address, the response in this next world. If that makes sense.
It does. What's really fascinating to me is that, if I think about the model you laid out of, trust and really working together, it also made me think about, I think there are a lot of companies that through coronavirus are either doing well, or they kind of see themselves like, hey, we're in a good position. But I also wondered, like, are you finding that creates a sense of complacency? Like, and particularly given that the coronavirus situation happened so quickly, like a lot of times you see these slow motion train wrecks, like the Great Recession. It was a slow motion train wreck.
Right.
This was not a slow motion train wreck.
Right.
It was actually a very fast, like
we just shut off the spigot. Right. Yeah.
Right. And it just makes me wonder when I look around, and I think I'm in this category also, where I'm like, okay, this happened. I think things will be okay. But there's also a sense of urgency that's missing. Yeah. Right. And I think I see that with some of the other companies and teams that we work with, where, especially in financial services, where, they're basically like, hey, we got cash. Everything's good.
And the government's going to give you more cash.
Right. But if you scratch the surface, you realize, like, wait a minute, actually, there's going to be a lot of defaults. There's going to be a lot of, like you were saying, not to be a Debbie Downer, but there's going to be a lot of economic tsunami coming.
It's happening already. Right. And in fact, even pre-pandemic, if you look at the amount of car loans that were being defaulted against, that was kind of a key indicator for the Great Recession that we had. That was happening even pre-pandemic, as we were starting to get, defaults in car loans escalating. And that was, people were starting to signal, okay, we might be a little inflated, right, in certain areas. I think that we're, I lost my train of thought on that one. Shoot, where were we going with that, Clay? Tell me about.
I think I was asking about the, just that sense of urgency, like companies that don't have a sense of urgency. And complacency, exactly.
Yeah, I think that you're going to see two things happening. If you feel like, if a company feels like they have more than enough cash on hand to weather the storm, and not focus on CX and not focus on innovation, or double down. Even if you are, you should be double downing on them, right? Becoming much more, customer focused than ever. Is that I think they're going to see that when we come out of this 18 months from now, 24 months from now, 3 years from now. I even read one Wall Street Journal report of maybe 10 years from now, whatever the case may be, that some of these companies will not be seen in the same light by their customers as they were in the pandemic, right? You have technological companies that are thriving right now, that are doubling their revenues because now everybody's working from home, increase in bandwidth, increase in remote conferencing capabilities, increase in all these stuff. These companies are really, thriving. I hope they're not thinking, okay, one, this is sustainable. They probably should. And two, I hope what they're thinking from this is now we have an extra added responsibility to our brand and reputation because our customers are trusting us in this, in this emergency, if you will. That my hope is that they're actually looking to better the customer experience as a result, right? Is that's really what I'm hoping, the humility, factor in continuity of operations. I hope that grabs hold where these customers really have a new appreciation, or these companies have a new appreciation for their customers and their employees, such that I'm not saying anyone's taking them for granted, but certainly, not even being complacent to earn the continued trust. Once we come out of this emergency, you will have had, hopefully, some sort of, positive emotional experience on that customer to maintain, your services moving forward, right? I have to use Grubhub now, but I can tell you sometimes they're a pain, right? I don't know that I'll continue to use them, post-pandemic because of my customer experience.
The experience, that's
right.
true. I've
Absolutely.
heard other people complain about,
So,
well, go ahead. Yeah.
No, go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say, you made me think about Andy Grove, the former CEO chairman.
Former boss.
Yeah. Where it's like, I think the book he put out was Only the Paranoid Survive, right?
That's
right. And in a way, not that being paranoid is probably not the healthiest thing, but to a certain extent, to fight complacency, you almost have to have that sense of paranoia. But I like the way you said it. It's almost not a sense of paranoia, but a sense of responsibility, heightened responsibility. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think a client that we both work with was sharing that because of COVID, some of their competitors no longer exist, and so they're picking up clients. And talking to the executives there, they really highlighting how important it is to deliver a higher level of customer experience. So these customers, it's that responsibility, I think, that comes into play, is like, well, it's not enough just to get new customers because the economic climate has changed, right? Or your competitors are not here anymore. A lot of companies, I think, will say, well, we'll invest less. We're not going to worry about investing in innovation or any of that, or customer experience. But really, they have to think about business continuity. Like, how do we make sure we don't end up, growing and then busting in 2 years, right?
Right, because the conditions have changed, right? And that's really where, the CX design thinking, BCP kind of, come together, and hopefully more of a real-time situation. I commend our shared client who, may be able to continue their operations on their current, customer or contact center, right? Instead, they're making it a priority, even though, some of their business has been impacted, to evolve and put a contact center in that's much more CX focused, that will help them deliver that personalized experience, in addition to double downing on hopefully their marketing automation and the personalized marketing experience as well, right? And so I think it's those companies that are really looking at this time as an opportunity to invest not only in themselves, but in their employees and their customers, that are really going to be able to come out ahead 2 years, several years from now. We're going to look back and say the ones that really did it right were the ones that took the time to, elevate their customer experiences positively, elevate their employee experiences positively, make it so much easier for their employees to move jobs or change geographies if they want to, and not have all this bureaucratic red tape, or make it so much easier for their customers to digitally interact with them, maybe even contact less, right, than before, in delivering the consistency of experience that they expect. And so I think that's going to be one of the key factors that, when we look back, we're going to say that these companies that really succeeded and did well were the ones that doubled down in those areas.
This is really good. So before we wrap up, just want to see any final words of wisdom or advice that you want to give to our audience in terms of the road ahead, and thinking about how do they continue to build their business and plan for disruption?
Yeah, my biggest advice would be that if you have people in your organization that look at business continuity, start pulling them into your operations planning meetings. Don't look at them as, kind of the after the fact guys that when an earthquake happens, then you call them and go, okay, where's my plan? Start asking them to do real-time assessments. Start, requiring that they, leverage data. And so my biggest advice would be is that if you have those people, pull them in to your daily operations discussions. If you don't have those folks that understand how continuity of operations can impact your business, start seeking them out and really integrating them as part of your daily operations discussions. And then, I would say really take a step back and look at the mission of your company. Is it value focused on wanting to provide a better service experience, more good for your customers and humanity? Are you pulling back from social responsibility investments? Are you investing in your community more? Start really thinking about, if you haven't already, not pulling away from and not maybe putting to the side some of the investments you can make in your community, but actually looking at all the different areas you can get more involved in, so that your community sees you, your customers see you as a critical part of your community, if you will. Because every time I go into one of my clients, we write a BCP mission statement. And I tell the executives, you have a responsibility to your community to survive. Your community is depending on you to employ 4,000, 5,000 people. Your community is depending on you to provide the goods and services that you provide. In an emergency, it's absolutely your responsibility to be there for your community. Now more than ever, I think companies have started investing in their community as well. So I would, those three things: get your continuity of operations involved in more of your day-to-day operational discussions. Certainly make sure that your CX and EX is elevating, right? Is you're leveling up, if you will. And then, make sure that you're investing in your community as well. And, wanting to align your mission with, being responsible to providing, value and services to those that you impact directly.
This has been a really powerful conversation, just given where we are and also the intersections that we were able to walk through. I think people are going to be really grappling with this. This is so important, and people need to grapple with, bringing these pieces together. So we always ask guests before we close out, what is one, if we could give you one superpower, you could have one superpower, what would that superpower be?
Oh, wow.
You could have one superpower, given all the stuff going on.
Where do you pick from with everything going on? I think if I could help heal, people, whether it's physical or emotional pain, I would love that superpower. If I could, just go around, the entire world is in, some sort of pain, it seems like, right? From one thing or another. If you take, just what's happening in our country out of the picture, but everywhere, everybody's grappling with economic uncertainty, health uncertainty. And so if there's a way that I could help heal those folks, I would want to do that.
It's really nice. I think sometimes we get people who want to fly, but it's really today that's so important, is the people healing.
I think so.
That's really good. So if our audience wants to contact you, where can they reach you? What are your digital handles?
Okay, well, you can reach me at my email address, first and foremost, at Reshma at projectsbycompass, COMPASS.com. So Reshma at projectsbycompass.com is my email. Website is projectsbycompass.com as well. So you can reach out to me in one of those two ways, and even my cell phone at area code 949-510-7019. Give me a call. Happy to have discussions with anyone, answer any questions anytime.
And I know we've worked with you on different projects, and just really, it's been a pleasure both working with you on projects and working with you as a partner, right? And so really look forward to having you back on, and definitely if you're looking for help with business continuity planning or just executive level project management, Reshma is the person to talk to. I have to give you a plug.
Thank you.
And just the experience coming from Intel and then other clients that you've worked with. And I also know you're involved with multiple nonprofits.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know your heart is huge in terms of what you're giving back and how you're supporting the community in Orange County and beyond. So thank you for your time today.
That. Thank you.
And I want to say Godspeed.